Hayden wanted to start out by continuing some of the work you were doing last week.
Yes.
And so I'm going to turn the lecture over to Hayden to begin with. I'll join in when needed. And then, depending on how things go, I will continue and talk about stability, which we've been putting off for a little bit. And as always, this is live streamed and recorded, although, of course, if we're just chatting, we probably won't put that up on the YouTube afterwards. Okay, Hayden, you want to take it away?
Yep, sure thing. So, all right, hello everybody. We last week worked a little bit on exercise 9.3 with the ultimate goal of producing a phase plot. So we're going to maybe back up and try to work through 9.3 again in a slightly different framing to hopefully make things a little bit more clear about what the example is trying to do. And then we have an exercise on actually building the phase plots using the template code provided in Herbert's textbook. And then like James said, depending on how much time we have, we may switch over to lecture on stability once we've gotten through some of these activities. So we thought we would start off today just by revisiting the idea of the toggle system. So just to warm up a little bit, get people thinking, we have some initial questions about the toggle. So go ahead and feel free to read through these. The first is just, what is it? What are we looking at here? What are the reactions described by the diagram above? And then we have a couple of questions about thinking about input signals coming into A. So just take, let's see, maybe 2 minutes. We have 2 minutes on the clock here. And then we'll have people just share briefly before we get started on the actual exercise.
So do you have to go to a breakout room now, or no?
No,
I just
no,
somehow
just
showed
think, just
up.
think for a minute.
Yeah.
I created breakout rooms so they're available if people want to use them later, but they're just there as a convenience. I mean, maybe to put some biological context on what Hayden is saying here, this is one of the more common gene regulatory network motifs. It occurs dozens or even hundreds of times. And it's particularly known in developmental biology, although it's also important in cancer biology. And so when we ask the question, what is a toggle? It's also known sometimes as a latch. The question is both a biological question, what would the circuit do functionally? When does it occur? And then also mathematically and functionally, what does it do? If you look, for example, SOX and OCT have this kind of feedback relationship with each other as genes.
All right, so that was the 2 minutes there. Who wants to walk us through? 1 and 2 kind of go together, so who wants to describe what this is? William?
I can do it, or
Cool.
I can try. So this is this is how I just look at it. So A activates A, B activates B, and at the same time B inhibits A and A inhibits B. And so this, I think when one when there's a lot of A, I think the point of this is you're never going to have a lot of A and a lot of B, and you're never going to have no A or no B. I think it's one or the other. I'm not sure though. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, for the most part. So does anybody else have opinions on whether you can have no A or no B? Ibrahim? Yeah.
I think when you only have A and no B, then it stays just A because it doesn't get blocked by B. And it would block B, so B will never occur. Or if you just have a lot of B and no A, then you should just stay by B. But otherwise, I agree with Williams. When it's similar, then one blocks the other, and the other one blocks the other one, and it's an in-between state. And when it's not totally symmetric, then you fall to one of the sides.
Ibrahim, that's all your hand up, but you have something.
Yeah, I
more
was
to
just going to
add?
say basically the same thing Elmer said, that basically if like the constants, like the K's for the equations are the same, basically whichever one has like the greater concentration is going to overpower the other one.
Okay, those are good insights. So something you might want to think about looking at this diagram is, suppose we just had A by itself with no B. So it's just the A activates A circuit. We did that in class. What did we find? Remember when we had just the left-hand side of this circuit, what did it do? We spent a day doing that. And you also
Just grow exponentially because it doesn't get blocked.
no, not quite.
Okay.
Doesn't it grow into like the carrying capacity of the system? It grows exponentially.
Well, if A started out very small, what happened? Do you remember? This was our first example of a bistable circuit. If you just have A exciting A and you start out with no A, does A ever get big? Okay. Well, I'll remind you. So if A starts out small, it stays small. If A starts out large, it stays large. So A feedback on itself will give you, if A is small, it stays small. If A is big, it stays big. Similarly, B feedback on itself. If B starts small, it stays small. If it starts big, it stays big. So these are latches. If it's high, it stays high. If it's low, it stays low. As you pointed out, this is a toggle. You can't have A and B both be high at the same time or low at the same time. What would happen if we just had the feedback A inhibits B and B inhibits A and nothing else? What would that do?
Pedro in chat says both go to 0.
Well, that's a little tricky. You can play with that. It's an interesting, it's not a trivial question to ask. You don't actually need A activating and B activating B. Just the cross inhibition is enough to get a toggle. So it's worth thinking about that. Okay. So please keep going here.
Right, so we have thinking about input signals coming into A is high and B is low. Are the input signals consistent or inconsistent? And then if A is high and B is high, are the input signals consistent or inconsistent? Any initial thoughts on that? Address what is consistent? It's a good question, actually. What do
Does this
people
mean
think? Let's
stable?
define consistent as a group here.
I just interpreted if the system is changing, switching, or if it just stays the attractor that it is. So more or less, are you somewhere that something moves, or are you in a place where it's already an attractor and it just stays in this attractor? That's how I interpreted it.
So another
Yeah, I
term
mean,
sometimes used is coherent. Coherent and incoherent. What are the signals coming into A? There are two. How many are there?
to the activation of A being activated by itself and B inhibiting A. So if A is high and B is low, then it's going to remain that way.
Right, exactly. So it's
consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and otherwise it's inconsistent. Or if
Right.
if they're both high, it's inconsistent. I mean,
yeah. One way you can do this, and I can't annotate. Maybe Hayden can give me annotation. Is okay. Pedro says question,
Yep.
question. So please read the textbook assignment which talks about this. Suppose A has the number 1 sitting on it, and I now track my arrow, and a positive arrow means that if the source end of the arrow is a 1, then the far end of the arrow is 1. So I have a 1 sitting on this little lollipop. If B is a 1, then I have a 0 sitting on the inhibit because I have an inverse. If B is 0, I have a 1. So I have a 1 coming in and a 1 coming in. They're both the same. If A were high, a 1, I'd have a 1 here. If B were high, I'd have a 0 here, and I'd have a 0 and a 1 as inputs. So they would be inconsistent with each other.
Can you draw that? Because I didn't follow.
Why don't you draw it? Why don't you, Hayden, give Pedro drawing privilege?
Yeah, everybody should have annotation
This
privileges.
one, it's 1 here. And
That's
0
right.
here.
Draw well, yes, it's an inhibitory signal. So if it's a 1 on the if it's 1 on the input side, you've reversed it, so it's a 0. Yes, that's right.
What else? Okay, so if it's 0 here, is 0 here, it's 1 here.
I can't see what you've just done.
Let me
Give A a value and then draw the signals.
Okay, so A is 0.
Okay, so draw a 0. Okay, fine.
Here, 1 here. No,
Right.
sorry.
Yes, that's a 1. Yes, that's right.
Okay.
So put it back. And now give B a value, either 0 or 1. You choose, but one of them. 1. Okay. So then you have a 0 for A. Okay. Now look at the input signals for A. What are they?
0 and 0.
Fine. So they're consistent.
Uh-huh.
And look at the input signals for B.
Mm-hmm. Consistent.
They're 1. And what's the value of A?
A is 1.
No.
Sorry, A is 0.
So your input is 0 and the value is 0. So the input and the output or the input and the state are consistent. What's the value of B?
1.
And what are the inputs to B?
1 and 1.
All right, so they're all consistent. Now make B 0. See what happens. Okay. So now what are the inputs to A?
0 and 1.
Are those consistent with each other?
No.
Okay. Is the 1 consistent with the value of A, which is 0?
No.
Okay. Same thing, look on the B side now. You've got to label the output of that arrow from A to B. There you go. Now look at that one.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a stable situation.
Mm-hmm.
Elmer walked us through this in some detail when he explained how Boolean networks work, where you look at the inputs and outputs, and then you update the values based on the inputs and the outputs.
But I still have a question. When you have no A,
Yes.
I understand that the negotiation makes a 1 on B, but
Yes.
but when there is no A, okay, logically can have influence on B because it will block. It will block. Yes, I get it. Okay, sorry, I had just to think it through. I don't want to confuse the other ones if they understood it, but I understand now. Yeah, thank you.
It's not trivial to figure these things out. That's why we want a simple example where we can walk it through together and make sure everybody can follow.
And what for me was important is biologically you can have A will be a blocking agent, and when it's not there, then it doesn't block, and it's not putting something there. That's how I have to picture it myself. If this helps somebody, yeah.
So we just walked through this table together.
Yeah.
There are
I
four
think
possible states. A can be low, B can be low, so you have four possible combinations.
Yeah, I guess that's ultimately, it's not truly zero, it would just be low versus high, right? Which is what 0 and 1 represent here.
Right. In reality, no gene is ever complete. Well, no, it never is a long time, but genes are usually not completely on or completely off. Usually they're either producing a low amount of the protein or a high amount of the protein. And there can be cases where they produce intermediate amounts of the protein as well. So the mapping of gene circuits to Boolean circuits isn't perfect, but very often they're either producing a lot or very little. So then you can map that to be like a 0 or 1. Okay.
Yep. So like James said, we just sort of walk through this, but the idea here is that they're consistent if the signals, activation and inhibition signal, are the same, and inconsistent if they're not. Pedro says no to 1.
Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
Great.
And obviously you could do the reverse by just asking about input signals to B as well, but it would just be flipped.
No, actually. That's not right.
Is it not?
I don't know who drew the X's and the check marks on the outside on the third column. But if you ask the question, are the input signals to be consistent? They're consistent in the same pattern. The circuit's totally symmetrical. So if you replace the letter A by the letter B and vice versa, you don't change anything. So you can't have a situation where the A signal is consistent and the B is not.
Oh, yeah. This would just just swapping letters around. Gotcha.
So the input signals to B are consistent. If you ask the question, are input signals to be consistent? It's no, yes, yes, no. Same thing. Good.
Okay, so that gives us, oh no, Pedro's annotations. Close my annotation. All right, so we're going to revisit this exercise 9.3 a little bit. We've tried to simplify the process to lead more easily towards constructing these phase portraits. So step 1, again, like last week, following the process that's been followed before in class, let's just write the reaction equations for the toggle problem, or the toggle motif rather. And again, this should only take a few minutes. It's taking you longer than that. Please do review previous slides. Again, feel free to reuse code that you've used in the past. And then we'll do step 2, which is to plot the time series for different initial conditions. Step 3 will be to plot, once we've done that, to plot A versus B. Then we'll repeat that for different initial values of A and B. And then the crux here is that overlaying the plots from step 4 will result in your phase portrait, essentially. And we'll talk a little bit more as we go about how that builds up. So first things first, go ahead and just try to write the reaction equations, get your code set up. Yeah, Ibrahim says, my Colabs keep crashing. I have a similar issue. Every time I try to install Tellurium, it seems to, it's like a 70% chance that it's going to crash. Typically, it's just a warning, though, if you reboot your runtime.
So I think maybe what we have to say, there is now, I mean, the problem is that you have to install first opt install lib and curse 5 and then pip install Tellurium, import OS and kill it and then run this cell. And when this is all done, at that point you can run the second cell where you really import Tellurium. If you run it before, then it just will not be executed because it have to reboot. This kill command is rebooting the notebook. That's just the way how it is. I have never had a problem when I did it like this, but maybe people can show what they do, then I figure out what it is.
Crashing like mid Tellurium install. I ran it like 15 times. It's crashing every time.
Can you share and
Do
show?
you want to share your screen?
Yeah, okay. It wasn't like this last week, which is what's confusing me. I'm just like rerunning last week's code. Yeah, there. Oh, I'm not even sharing.
Screen sharing.
Oops. I'll order it again. This is the code that Elmer gave, right?
And the first one, the apt installs C library, and then the pip install Tellurium, which is just what it uses this library, and it updates the latest version, and then it imports OS Python library and it kills
Yeah.
what was on. And when this is done, after that you can just do the normal input.
It crashed though midway through this.
This is crashing? It's
Yeah.
strange.
It's
Where does
crashing.
it crash? Can you
Yeah,
show?
yeah, you should have shown the
Yeah.
error message.
I'll run it one time. There, session crashed.
Yeah, but
No,
yeah,
crash
but this
code.
is what the code does. This is killing does
But
the
I can't
crash.
even. I can't run this anymore. It
Yes,
still should.
but then can you take the import command in your own cell just to take the input commands, nothing else?
Works.
Just
It works.
do two cells. Do one cell. The first one is good, but then do one single cell just import.
But the problem is not Tellurium. The problem is NumPy is not importing right.
Yeah, and in your line there that's underlined, you've got NumPy instead of NP.
Oh.
Yeah.
So your label.append, the one that's underlined in red,
Oh,
should just be
yeah.
NP there.
Okay, this is okay. That's my bad.
And I recommend you take these two import commands that you have in an own box, and just have the import, and then you know import runs, and then comes your code. So then you have to run the whole import, and then the rest is code, right? So,
yeah.
That seems to be working fine.
Okay,
okay,
that was my
great.
bad. Sorry.
Okay, cool.
It's a little confusing because the restart of the cell of the writes an output, writes an error message. When it's executing correctly, it shows you an error message. So you
Yeah.
have to know that that error message is actually saying it's working, not that it's not working.
I mean, it's cool that we can install own Linux libraries on Colab, that they let us do that, right? I mean, it's amazing. In
That's what
nanoHUB, in
that's
nanoHUB, you would have to send
can't do it.
thousands of emails that they do it for you. So this is amazing.
Yeah, that's the problem with nanoHUB, that they won't let you do exactly what we just did. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So do people have equations ready?
Yeah, does somebody want to show us the equations?
I mean, I have them. It's just I wrote them on paper. So I don't know
That's fine.
what the best way. Um, okay. Should I just show it or should I say it out loud?
Hold them up in front of the camera, I suppose.
Okay, wait. Okay, maybe. Wait, I don't know if you could. I don't know if you could see. It's probably
That's
not good.
that's fine. dA by
Wait,
dt.
that's the D.
dA by dt is k1 we've got a to the h over big capital K to the h, ka to the h plus a to the h plus b to the h. That's fine. Minus k to a. That looks perfect.
Okay, and then the B one's similar, kind of.
Exactly the same,
Yeah.
except a and b are
Well,
swapped.
it should be exit. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's perfect. Again, whenever you see an excitatory arrow, you get an activating Hill function. Whenever you see an inhibitory arrow, you get an inhibitory Hill function. In this case, you have to decide how you combine activation and inhibition. The way you've done it is through this mixing of the two, which is fine. The other way to do it would be to multiply the two, which is fine. And then you always have to remember that for a gene regulatory network, you have decay, which is not written explicitly in the diagram, which you put in. So that's it. So it really only takes about 2 minutes to write, and each thing immediately follows from the arrows in the diagram. So great. Okay, perfect. All right, so the next step is to plot a time series. And I really cannot emphasize enough, especially for Pedro and maybe Elmer, don't write things from scratch. Always use old code and adapt it.
NP got around? What the fuck does that even mean, dude?
Sorry?
Oh my gosh, I was unmuted. I'm reading old code and it says np dot around, and I don't know what np dot around means.
Around changes the number of decimal digits. So
Okay.
It's an unfortunate function title because it spells another word, but it's actually a round, not around.
Got it. Yeah. I was unmuted.
The place you use that is typically if you're doing displays of things. So you want to label the axes with, you want it to be 10.1, 10.2, 10.3, 10.4. You don't want it to be 10.10001.
Got it.
Background truncates decimals to a certain precision.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. And so one reason to use something like Colab is that you can save all your code, and then every week you build onto it. And you can have cells that do specific things, cells that do parameter scans, cells that do different kinds of plots. And so the idea is that you build up a repertoire of code that you can use again and again. Adapt. It's pretty important that you get in the habit going forward, not for this class only, but for all classes, of having code that does things that you know that is are functional, that you can adapt, that you don't start from nothing when you start coding. So, for example, you have something that has your specification of your model in antimony. You have something that simulates the model. Then you wrap that, and then you have something that plots it. Then you wrap that in code that does a little loop that changes a parameter value, for example, the initial conditions, and overlays the plots. Or a code that determines the steady state values and plots those. So you don't start from scratch each time. It's really important because otherwise the things take too much time. And I don't just mean too much time here in class to do the exercises. I mean going forward, if you start everything from scratch every time, it's not practical.
Elmer, I don't know if you saw in the chat page, I requested that you send the code from last week that you were working on together.
Are you talking to me or sorry?
Yeah, Elmer, I don't know if you saw in the chat page, I requested that you send him the code that you were using
No, I
last week.
didn't. I can send him. Yeah, sure, definitely. Yeah, I can send help. Yeah.
My mouse just died. I need to find a battery.
I'm running the same code as last week, but I'm still running into the same confusion that we had last week, which is where for some reason Hayden, your example code showed like the difference between if A is larger than B, they'll like it's a different scenario, but for our code that me and William had written for some reason, B will never take over in the system.
Mhm.
Okay, do you want to screen share it? Maybe we can look at it together.
Yep. Yeah, I can't screen share it just yet.
Sorry. Okay, there we go.
Okay, so this was the system that we have. This is the equation that we had determined, I guess. And then these were the A's that were on the slide. And then here's just a parameter scan for A between 0 and 20. And then we're plotting A here, and then we're plotting B here for the same parameter scan. And then now we're changing B from 0 to 20. And plotting A, then we're plotting B. So this is A changing. And this is A after A0 changes, and this is B after A0 changes, and B just always goes to 0, which it shouldn't. It should go to 10 in these scenarios, but it's not.
What's the initial value of B?
10.
Okay, let's see. Let's look at the scan that's generating it there.
Yep.
Why don't you try to making the initial value of A small?
Oh.
Is there a typo?
Shit.
Still get the same.
Let's see. So the first one is
This one should be the same.
So you're plotting, the second one is plotting B versus
Yeah.
time. And so you're saying that the value of B is always small, even if A is small. Is that right?
In these first two graphs, A0 is changing, so A doesn't matter. So this is what we'd expect. But this is if we're changing B. Is it only plotting B equals 17? Why would it do that?
Like your final
Look
value
at-
of A
look
is
at- look-
17.5. Is there a loop issue where it's feeding in the value of A into your plots for B? Your final value of A?
Maybe it shouldn't, but it wouldn't even make sense for this one because it is showing different starting points for B. I
Okay,
don't know, it's just a label issue.
let's look at that. Let's look at it because it possibly, let's see what, so the fourth plot, let's look at how the fourth plot is generated. Okay,
Fourth
so
plot.
you change B in steps of 2.5. Okay. You set the initial value for B, you run the simulate, you get the value of B.
It should be B. But that's just a label issue that we're running into. It
Let's see
shouldn't
what's
really matter.
And so for plot array, fine, new T plot array. You might use t.show, I think, instead of plot array at the end, but okay, let's see. So let's run that again, see what happens. Make sure that it updates the third one. Okay.
Yeah.
It does look like B is going low all the time. So now why don't we try starting with a different initial value of A? So why don't you overwrite the value of A in the loop, inside your loop? Why don't you set r dot A equal to 0, for example, there. No, inside the loop there, just in the last one.
Okay, I'll do them both. Just
Okay. Now you better make it okay, fine. Let's see what happens. Does it make any difference?
it still drops to 0.
A starts at 0 and stays 0. Okay. And B drops to 0. So let's look at the simulate the antimony, because something has to be wrong, because these things are totally symmetric. So if A is doing something, B should do the same thing. So there has to be a typo. See what the typo is. K1, K4, K3. Okay, so why don't you make K3 and K2 equal to each other? That's the problem.
I think we tried this also last week.
So make K3's 0.2.
Still.
No, you didn't change it.
I just made them both 0.6 instead of 0.2. I can make them 0.2.
Okay. There.
Now it changed.
Now it works. Yeah.
Oh, boy. If I made these 0.6, why was it not working?
Then they both should go to 0. What is that number doing? What is that? What is the value of that value just changed to? What do K2 and K3 do?
These are the decay rates.
Right. So if you have a lot of decay, what happens?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's just going to go to 0 anyways. So what isn't 0.6 the number that's on the slide?
I don't see the slide at the moment, so I can't tell you. What I will tell you is that you need to that mistakes are made. And so it's important when you see something like that to ask the question, why is it not working?
Yeah.
And one of the first thing you could say is, did I make a mistake in my code? And here you checked your code and your code is correct. And then the question is, are the parameter values sensible? And oops, well, the decay rate was so high that it was going to kill everything. Okay.
This looks good now. Thanks.
Great. Okay, good. Does everybody have this working? Do you want to share this code with everybody, or does anybody need the code to share? Or does everybody have it?
I have.
I can copy paste it also, just in case someone doesn't have it.
Okay, it's important that everybody has some version of this. Okay, great. Alex, are you following this? Because I know you sort of joined this course in the middle, so we don't want to lose you here.
I think so.
Okay, great. Okay, Hayden, what did you?
Yeah,
Oh,
it
yes.
does look like the suggested value for K3 was 0.6 in the slide.
So we should fix that slide. That's a mistake in the slide.
What should we? Let's see. What did we change it to? 0.2?
Yeah, 0.2 and 0.2. Now, what happens if the initial values of A and B are the same? Try that. Try a scan where you set both the initial value of A and the initial value of B to be something, but it's a different value. Ibrahim, maybe you try that one because you've got your code. What happens? And maybe you want to screen share that and do it with everybody together.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to clarify here, this meant A equals B equals, and then try each of these values, not somehow assign 5 things at once. So I guess
Yeah, it's not a quantum computer.
yeah.
Basically, again. Just assign these to the same number. And then I could just change this to what were the numbers? It was 0.1110. I think these were them.
Sorry, I was muted. We had
I
0.
think they were 0,
0.1.
0.1. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, 0.5, 1, and 10.
Okay, I mean the labels will be wrong, but that doesn't matter, I guess. Let me just put this in a new cell.
That's interesting. So if they start with the same value, they both go to 0 no matter what. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's possible. I don't know.
It makes sense if the K's are symmetric, right?
Well, actually, I'm a little bit surprised by that, but it's possible. I believe you if you tell me that that's true.
If the K's are not symmetric, then they don't always go to 0.
So that's an interesting result. That actually is, thinking about it, I know, yes, that's correct, but it's not an obvious result. Especially that it happens only if they're symmetric. Okay. Do you want to do the next step, Hayden?
Sure. So that was when A equals 10 and B equals 0 starting out.
Well, this was basically to get the parameter scan to work. So I think if Ibrahim has it working, does anybody not having it work? So that is everybody able to find a situation where A goes high and B goes low and vice versa? To make sure that everybody can replicate what Ibrahim showed.
Looks like we got a yes from William, Elmer, and Pedro.
I am doing the phase space.
I have it.
Space.
Okay.
Alex, is it working for you, or do you need code that you can run from somebody else?
I think I think
I
You wanna
tried to
show-
get the range working and somehow I didn't. But I
Alex-
don't know. Because the integers. Yeah,
Alex,
sorry. Yeah,
you want to screen share and show us where you are? That would be good.
have Ibrahim's code because I have a little bit behind, but I have it now. I set his code.
Okay. Just one. I mean, it's fine to start with somebody else's code. The key thing is make sure it works for you if it's running. Okay. Okay. So the next step, Hayden, was what? Was A versus B, right?
Yeah. Now we plot. Let's see. Back up to this one. Yeah. Now we plot A versus B.
So now instead of plotting the x-axis being time, I make the x-axis A and the y-axis B.
Can I share screen?
Sure.
Yep. Can you take over the screen share for me, Pedro, or do I have to stop first?
You have to stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Pedro, you've jumped way ahead. Please just do the simple one.
What is the simple one?
Just plot A versus B for one initial value of A and B.
Okay.
Does anybody have that? Can anybody take the code? Ibrahim, we could work with your code. If you want to screen share it, we could do it together.
Okay, I can do that again. Unless someone else wants to take a shot at it. I know we've been doing this for a while.
William, how about you? No, Ibrahim is fine. Okay, good. So now let's just take one of this example. This is a fine example.
Yeah.
How would you plot A versus B? You could take the code you already have, copy the code, put it in a new cell, and ask the question, how could I modify it to plot A versus B instead of having the x-axis be time?
And just
That'll work. You might want to relabel your axis.
yeah.
Could we not just take the NumPy array out and do kind of like a scatter plot or so? Or do we have to stay with plot array in Tellurium?
You don't have to do anything, but I would recommend
I mean,
sticking.
what do you recommend? Yeah, I mean, I would like to learn. Of course, there's always another way to do it.
I think what you have here is fine for the moment. Let's just run it and see what we get. Okay. So this is a little bit strange. Can anybody tell me what happens here?
I think, have you not to in the end, in the last plot array as well, to say what you want to plot? Let's just label. Oh, I don't know.
Well, why don't you try not
Labels equals labels. What is this? Labels equals label.
that's the
Okay, I don't know. I don't know.
Why don't you try one thing before you do that? Before you do that, why don't you not
Right.
make A and B equal? Yeah, there you go.
Maybe it's the range. I was running 20.
So there was, but let's look back at your times at the first set of time series that you did. And
This
let's
one.
ask the question. I'd asked people to do this in semi-analytically, but it was confusing.
Is there any other way
It's
that you
important.
can
It's
value that,
important that you know what the range of values your
like you
variables will
extra-
achieve is. In other words, if the value, in other words, it's if you look at the values for A, the values of A in this are between 0 and about 17.5, right? And the steady
Yeah.
state values are about a little over 0 and about 10 point something.
Yeah.
For the B one, your values are between 0 and about 20. So when you're going to be scanning parameters, scanning values for A and B, you know that the ranges have to be comparable to the values they achieve
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit more.
Yeah.
If you're going to plot pictures, you know what the scales are. So
Yeah.
that's what that initial question that people found confusing was, which was try to get an estimate of the range of the values that you're going to get. That was why we did that. Okay. So now we're trying to plot A versus B. And let's see what's going on. There's one where the initial value. So I'm not quite sure why the B axis is constrained the way it is. Because it looks like things are going off to the right, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm a little puzzled by that, but okay.
Is it because the step, like you're going from 0, 0.1, 0.51, and 10?
Should
Wouldn't
I
it make more
switch
sense
this
to make it a
back to the
continuous?
A range one?
Yeah, I'd go back to your A range, your NumPy A range. Good point, William. There we go. That's better. The initial value of A that you set was 0. Is that right?
Oh no, Ace. Yeah, you're right. That should be that's the last issue. You're right.
So why don't you?
Change this.
Oh, I wouldn't make it 0. I wouldn't make it exactly 0. I think that's a mistake. So make it, yeah, try 0.1 is fine. Okay. I'm just a little puzzled because the initial value of B,
Mm-hmm.
0, 0.2, and so on. But I don't see the intermediate values. Do you? Oh, I see.
It start on the right. Yeah, it's
Um,
going to the left.
So the value of A is always going to 0. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. What if you start with a bigger value of A? You don't have to change your code here. You could overwrite the value of A and
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's better.
try to make initial value of A 10.
I think this is what we started with before, and it's still.
Don't make it an integer though. Okay. Okay, that's fine. But now you see two things happening. If the initial value of A is above 10,
Or B is
initial value
above
of A
10.
is right, the B is above 10, what happens?
B goes to 20.
Right. And if the initial value of B is below 10, what happens?
B goes to 0.
Yeah, you got it. Good. So now you're beginning to see the thing about these trajectories is the big problem is you don't know what direction you're moving, right? You have to remember what your initial value was. So why don't everybody try and reproduce what you have here? I know Pedro's already done this, but everyone else, please take the time to do that. And Ibrahim, you could try plot now, not putting a second loop in and scanning not only the initial value of B, but the initial value of A. So do double loop. Okay. See what happens. That's basically what Pedro was showing us earlier. We're catching up with where Pedro was. And I'd like somebody else to show their results too, to just make sure everybody's following.
Yeah. So I did, so this was my initial parameters this is just what I had from last, maybe, I mean, it's going to be different. Our graphs are going to be different, but I just plotted it for different values of A and B. We're going from 0 to 10, stepping 0.5, with initial values, or I guess the initial values don't matter.
So I'm gonna
And
make a
that's what I
suggestion.
got.
Why don't you get rid of the labels because they're making a mess.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try.
I guess I don't like that. It's gonna take like, oh, it took no time now. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, good. And so you're scanning both the initial values of A and the initial values of B. And you'll notice it's not symmetrical because the 0.2 and 0.6 are not the same. Why don't you try setting that value
Yeah.
6 to 0.2 for both? There you go.
Okay.
Do other people
And
have
then
something?
what, to get it more curved, I would just increase the amount of like
Intermediate steps? Yeah,
like, yeah. Okay,
there you go.
cool.
So can you figure out which is the start and which is the finish of each line?
Yeah, I mean, this is the finish, this is the finish, this is the finish. Yeah.
So why don't
For
we,
now.
one other thing that sort of might be useful is your initial values are between 0 and 10. Why don't you go up to 15 so that you can actually see things go a little further? Because you're sort of cutting your plot off where something's happening. So let's extend it. This was what I was saying about sort of have to play. There you go. That's nice. So can anybody explain to me what happens here? What are you seeing? Let's ask somebody who hasn't talked so much, like Alex, if he's here. Or William, you can explain it, or Ibrahim. Pedro knows the answer pretty well, so I don't want him he can, if people are stuck, he can help. But
I can go, I guess.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, William, if you wanted to say it, you can go and say it. Or
No, you got it.
I mean, it just seems like for any scenario in like the top left, it seems like those are scenarios where the initial concentration of A is larger than B. The end scenario is with A equaling 10 and B equaling 0. And then the symmetric thing happens with B in like the bottom right. And then there's this line where A and B are, if they're both the same, they'll both end up going to 0. And then there's also this strange section if A is significantly small and B is significantly small. They both end up at 0.
Yep, that's right. So the latch isn't actually doing what it's supposed. The toggle isn't doing what it's supposed to do, which is, if A and B both start out too small, you wind up with 0. If A and B are equal, you wind up with 0. That's a little bit of a surprise. They shouldn't. That's not a very biologically. That would be not a good latch. So the circuit doesn't actually do what we would like it to do, probably biologically, but that's how it behaves. What if we make those values of K, those K values slightly different? Instead of 0.2 and 0.6, make it 0.25 and 0.2 for the decays.
There's change. Okay.
That's fine.
This is B. This affects B.
You have B decaying a little faster. Okay, so something interesting has happened here. What is it?
Yeah. All of the initial values where B is greater than A, right? Or all the initial values over here are decreasing to not 10 anymore. They're going to like 8-ish.
But the basic shape hasn't changed that much, right? You still have a clump of values that go to A0 and B high.
I mean, now there's no separate, like no big line.
Right, there's no diagonal. We've gotten rid of that diagonal, haven't we? There's still a choice. If at some point
But the diagonal would exist. It's just that we don't plot it at the moment, right? There have to be saddles somewhere.
Right, there is. There's still a place, right? Some of the values go to the A high and B low. Some go to A low and B high. So yes, they're different. You could also remember we said in these kinds of circuits that there usually is a basal transcription rate, which we have as 0 here. If we turned that on, it would get rid of that lower left quadrant where everything goes to 0.
Okay.
So we don't have to do that right now. Okay, does everybody have looks like this? You want to try that? We can try that.
Well, I mean, wouldn't that just be adding one, like a number to?
That would be adding a small number. Yes, just a constant to that.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't.
Okay.
Oh.
Well, that did rather a lot.
I think you also have to add it to B.
Yeah.
Well, but they don't have to be the same. I mean, again, you've made things. So I'm just pointing out you can explore a lot here.
Got it. Okay.
But let's come back to our original one. Let's put it back. Let's keep that on the screen. But let's come to the original. Let's go back to the original case that you had, where it was both with 0.2 for both and no basal transcription. Okay, good. So, what is a fixed point or a steady state? That's where you wind up at long times. How many fixed points, how many stable fixed points are there?
3.
3. And what are the values?
A equals 10, while B equals 0. B equals 10 while A equals 0, or they both equal 0.
Right. Perfect.
10 and 0.
Now, we haven't talked much about unstable steady states. An unstable steady state is a place where if you start exactly on the value, it stays there, but if you move away even a little bit, it goes far away. Are there any unstable steady states in this picture?
Yes, the diagonal.
Yeah.
Well, what about
A equals B?
Well, if A equals B, actually, in this particular situation, if A equals B, I move down that diagonal line to 0, 0, don't I?
Oh.
So that's not a steady state. That happens to be what's called a separatrix. If I'm above it, I go to one fixed point. If I'm below it, I go to another. Separatrix from separate. But what happens at A equals 0, B equals 5?
5, yeah.
If I'm just to the right of it, I go to 10. If I'm just to the left of it, I go to 0, right? So I'm not seeing it because I'm not starting exactly on top of it. But if I started right on top, there's that gap. You see it as a gap in the lines, right? So there are two unstable steady states, which would be B equals 5, A equals 0, and A equals 5, B equals 0. And maybe there's an unstable steady state along the diagonal. It's hard to tell from the picture. But anytime you have two stable steady states, here you have one at 0 and one at 10. In between them, there has to be an unstable steady state somewhere. That's always true.
How does that different from a saddle point? Have we seen the diagonal? I don't see that.
Well, if it were unstable fixed point, then we'll come. I'm trying to think about the best way to answer that question. We will see it in a few minutes.
Okay, yeah. Can I quickly share my code because I don't
Go
get
ahead.
totally this plot? If there's no other questions, thank you.
Is everybody produce something like that? Does anybody need help getting to it?
Yes, I need help.
Thank you, William, for being willing to share that with us. That was great.
Where can I share? So,
Alex, were you able to run that and get something that looked like that? We can walk you through it if you're having trouble.
I got it, I think.
Well,
so
if you
do
say
I share my
you want to
screen?
share it, yes. Okay, good. Elmar, go ahead.
Do you see my code or do you just
Yep.
see
I see your code.
Great. So I have this point from 10. I haven't done both for loops, but how did you get a longer? I say how you specify the range. I don't got this range right. I think.
What range?
Did I get here bigger range for the y-axis and the z-axis, which are A and B?
Because it's auto scaling, so those are the values you have.
But before Williams managed to get it bigger.
Well, why don't you scan B?
Oh yeah, I see. Okay, yeah, sure. When I do the second loop, because this is 20 that I get here, and the 10 I get from my settings.
Why don't you do
Right.
the?
Yeah. Okay, I see.
Why don't you put the second loop in now? Let's look at it together.
Yeah.
It's prettier with both loops turned on.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're going to have to change that line where you change the value of B. At the moment, it's commented out. There you go.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, that's just
You've got your show in the wrong place.
great. Oh, lovely. Thank you very much.
Great. Alex, do you want to show us what you've got?
I stopped sharing. Yeah.
It's not trivial to get this far, so I think it's worth spending a class so everybody can do this. Great. Okay, this looks good. Anybody else? I think we've seen William, Elmer, Alex, Ibrahim, Pedro. You got it a little faster, but I wanted to make sure everybody was caught up. Do you want to show what you have now, Pedro?
Bye-bye. Have a good night.
So Pedro, I guess one thing there is it looked like you were going from 0 to 10. You might want to increase the range of initial values a little bit.
Yeah, I tried 0 to 20. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I think everybody has this now. Now now Hayden, you want to look at the other code as well? Was that it?
Yeah, so it looks like things went much better this week. Everybody managed to get their phase plots going. So one thing that we do want to do now that we've kind of walked through how the phase plots are constructed is take a minute to actually look at a couple of ways that it's done in Herbert's textbook. So there's some code in the appendix to chapter 13, listings 13.5 and 13.6, and I have page numbers here on the slide for people to reference. Go ahead and copy the code out of both of those listings into a new, either a file if you're running locally or into a Colab notebook. And then, so here there's a couple of notes too. So if you don't have Herbert's textbook pulled up or nearby to reference, I recommend grabbing it now. Just as a note, listing 13.5 in the appendix produces figure 13.3. Listing 13.6 produces figure 13.23. So we'll give you 10 to 15 minutes to just sort of read through the code for each plot and interpret what the code is doing. So listing 13.5 is going to be relatively similar to what we just did. 13.6 is a different and much more efficient method of running this, computationally efficient at least, which may be useful for you to use as you move on with your projects, especially if you need to be building and running a lot of these graphs as you're testing. So take 10 to 15 minutes to, after you've copied and pasted the code, just read through it, annotate the code with comments, try to make some sense of what you're looking at, particularly that code from listing 13.6. And feel free to ask questions, discuss with classmates. If you run into unfamiliar functions, don't forget that there's generally pretty robust documentation on how these things work, particularly if it comes from a Python package. And then once we've done that, we'll have a group discussion about how the phase plot code works and what it's doing.
I mean, 13.5 does essentially exactly what we just did.
Mm-hmm.
It does it in a slightly more vectorial way than we did it, but it does exactly what we just did. 13.6 does things a little bit differently. And you almost certainly will have to look up how there's a SciPy function that's used to do the plot. And you'll almost certainly have to look that one up. It's not as obvious how it works.
Yeah, Ibrahim,
Okay.
I will copy and paste the code for you.
I also have paper. So.
No.
Yeah, I'll put this in the chat.
It's actually in the notebook I shared a week ago or 2 weeks ago, or the Colab notebook that I shared was also in the Google Drive, I think under lecture 7, so it's a while ago. That code was there. But we'll put it again. Give it to
trick for this is copying this without the headings on the PDF. I did that a couple nights ago when I was testing and couldn't figure out why it wasn't running. It's because it had a heading and a page number in the middle of my code. All right, so
I mean, one thing you'll find, for example, in Herbert's code is the way the loops are constructed is slightly different from the way we just did it. He uses something called linspace, which is very similar to arange, but it's not the same command. But conceptually, what he's doing in the first one is identical. Second one is slightly different.
So let's go ahead and talk about this for a couple of minutes as a group. So I guess first of all, any lingering questions before we open up that people want to have addressed up front?
Yeah. So what is the null client space exactly? Is that where the change in one of the variables is 0, right?
Precisely. And why
Okay,
that
but that doesn't make
is something we haven't really talked about yet. That's what
Okay,
I hope I'll get. That's what I've been. The lecture that I keep not giving is on that.
okay.
The original plan was we would have you plot some null lines so you knew what they looked like graphically and numerically, and then we would explain what they meant. But in fact, we spent a lot more time doing the plotting and than we anticipated. So you've been delayed a little bit. That's a good question. But yes, the null line is if you have, say, A on the x-axis and B on the y-axis. The one null line is when the derivative of A is 0, wherever the derivative of A is 0, that's one null line. And the other null line is wherever the derivative of B is 0. And when those two lines cross, the derivative of A and the derivative of B are 0, which means it's a fixed point. So any place null lines cross, you have a fixed point or steady state.
Okay. Well, couldn't they have made this? Okay, whatever. I mean, he could have made it clearer by. I guess I can't. That's fine. But it would make more sense to label the null line spaces. Shouldn't they be labeled like independently, or no? To actually, or can you easily tell?
You mean which one is which? Well, do you have the code
Yeah.
running? Why don't you show us the code
Yeah.
running? You can use that as the
Yeah.
ground for displaying it.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Yeah. So, let me just think. Wait, I'm kind of confused.
So this is a slightly different toggle from the one we were looking at, but it's similar. Okay, so tell me what I'm seeing on this graph. Somebody. William is fine, or somebody else. It's pretty close to the one we just looked at. It's not identical to the one we looked at, but it's pretty close. There's one very significant difference from the one we did together just now.
Are you talking visually or?
What are the fixed points?
So they are
Oh,
the 0, 6 points not existing. Sorry.
the green points 6, and not 0. So what, 1.5, 1.5 or something like that? I don't know.
So this set of equations has a different fixed point. It does not have that situation where the small initial. Remember before, if A and B were both small, they both went to 0. In this case, if A and B are both, well, in this case, you don't get that. You don't get the values going to 0 that way.
Yeah.
Now, we also found that there were two unstable fixed points before at 0, 5 and 5, 0. Do you see those here?
No, it's only one, and it's there in the middle by the crossing.
Exactly. So the fixed point structure is quite different from this. So why don't we look at the code, actually the model itself? How is it different from the one we wrote before?
I can explain. I mean, do you want me to explain the whole thing?
Well, let's just look at let's just look at line J1 and J2 because they're slightly different from the ones we had.
Oh, got it. Well, I mean, their numerators are just a constant.
Right. Remember what I said before, if we didn't have the auto activation, if we just had A inhibit B and B inhibit A, we would get a latch or a toggle. This is that. This is the one without A activating A and B activating B. Look at J1. What does it say? The production of X is what? Suppose the value of y is 0. Suppose the value of y is 0.
It's K1 minus K2x.
Right. So it's a constant production with a decay. So the value of the production of X is maximal when there's no Y. Similarly for Y, when there's no X. But there's no feedback. Does the production of X depend on X?
Yeah. Or no.
No, it doesn't. The production of X is independent of X. So this
Well,
is, yeah. Let's see if I can annotate on this screen. I don't think I can. Can you turn on annotation?
me?
Yeah, you have three dots at the bottom on the right and say enable annotation by others.
That work?
Okay, if you can't do it, it's not a big deal. I was just going to try.
I thought I
Okay, you
did it. I thought I did it.
Oh, yes, you did. Thank you very much. Got it. It just took a second. So here we have X and Y, and we have X inhibiting Y and Y inhibiting X. That's all we have.
Mm,
That's the circuit.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, and now do you want to tell us how what the code is doing and the key things that are going to yeah.
Yeah, so I think the np.m grid is it's a way to what? These are values. Oh, actually, this I don't understand. I don't understand the J part. But isn't this creating a grid of this is essentially a bunch of values or something? I have no idea that they fill in later on or something like that.
Yeah, this is creating the pairs of this is essentially doing your double loop over X and Y.
Yeah.
There are a lot of different commands in Python, NumPy, that create grids. One is called linspace, mgrid is another one.
Correct. And then, oops. And then it fills in, let's see. It's kind of hard to explain. It's looping over values of X and initial values of X and initial values of Y. And it is setting, yeah, this makes sense. So it's in looping over initial values of X and initial values of Y, going to those indices in the grid that we made and getting that value of X and that value of Y and setting it to our X and Y values. And then we are, wait, don't you need to simulate? Wait, I'm confused now.
This is the key thing here. You're not actually doing the simulation.
Oh, I guess you don't need to do, wait.
The key question is, what is this thing?
Yeah. R, which is, okay, that's the model. Oh, are those just all the values of X?
Well, what
Right.
it's a little hard to see, but what's that? I'm trying to see how do I can you erase the
derivative
annotation? I don't think I can do that from here for some reason.
Maybe
It's not letting me erase the annotations.
R prime or X prime, sorry.
Right. X prime is the time derivative of X. And so what this is doing is it's going to a position X comma Y and asking what direction does the flow move at that point.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense.
And so,
So does that?
yeah.
Well, no, it gets all of the directions and puts of X and Y and puts it into the UV matrix grid type thing. And now I envision a grid with a bunch of like arrows, I guess. And so now all you have to do, I think, is put it together. So I assume that's what this is doing, stream plot.
Yeah, stream plot is a
If,
pretty fancy function, and we were hoping people would look that one up. So stream plot takes a grid of vectors at each point in space and tries to connect them up and draw continuous vectors.
yeah.
And so now if you look
follows,
at the plot, now if you look at the plot, you see in our when we ran it, we were on a regular grid for our initial positions, and then we ran the code and we saw the lines draw. Here, it's created a regular grid of vectors, and it's up to Streamplot to decide how to connect them up.
Got it.
Now, you'd say, well, why would you do that? You'll notice some of the lines are very short, some are long, some are connected, some aren't. So, because Streamplot is trying to interpolate between those things. But the one advantage of it is it has the little arrows showing the direction of movement, which we don't get if we did it the other way.
Pedro
And
makes a good
then-
point that it's cleaner as well because it leaves off lines that aren't necessary for. Whereas the other method just plots everything you have.
Okay. And then this is plotting the red line pretty much, the null line. And it does it based on a function, which that doesn't really make sense.
Ibrahim, you have a question.
Yeah, so the derivatives of X and Y are a dictionary in R?
Yes. So
It just auto-generates it?
I actually was sort of surprised that worked. I know that if J1 is the derivative of X. So if you use quote J1, that works. I know that works. But the fact that X prime works, I didn't know. And we'd have to play with it a little bit to see how that works.
How does it have all these values if you never simulated it?
That's a good question. The answer is you're passing it an initial value. As soon as it has the initial value, it calculates the right-hand side of J1 and J2. And so basically the whole thing is just returning the value K1 over 1 plus y to the n1 minus K2 times x. So the thing is behaving like a function where you pass it the initial value of x and y, and it tells you what the right-hand side of that is.
Okay.
You don't need all the antimony to do that. You could easily have done it in Python directly, but that's how it's done here. And I don't know whether if you split the equations and you had multiple things having to do with x and y, whether the x prime works or not. I'd like to try that actually. All right. But let's cut. That's so great. Did that answer your question, Ibrahim, or are you still?
Yeah, that answers it. Thank you.
So does anybody want to take a stab on what line, the line numbers are turned off, but what those nullcline X and nullcline Y things are about? Because most of this code is trying to plot those nullclines, those red lines. So before we go too far, Ibrahim, you asked the question, I think, or William, you asked the question, how do you know which nullcline is which?
Actually, you can just give a different color for figuring out which one is which.
Right,
And
but
I think the 12th the 12 it takes from K1 that it have there. May. So that's what
Well,
I guess.
I would just change this to blue and plot it. I mean, right?
Okay.
Like,
That works. Okay, but
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but here's a different question. Look at the picture and tell me which null line is which.
yeah, I know well, I'm just trying to figure that out. I don't
Okay, but
understand
that's
it.
why I'm trying to help you. So let's take the red one. Find a point where the red one crosses one of the lines.
Okay, like right here.
Okay, good. What is the derivative at that point?
Oh,
If I follow,
yeah,
which direction is it pointing? Is it pointing vertically or horizontally?
it's horizontal.
Okay, if it's horizontal, which is y changing if it's horizontal?
No.
So that's the y dot equals 0 null line.
Yeah, got it.
And now look at the blue one.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Are the lines vertical or horizontal when it crosses?
Yeah, they're vertical.
Okay, so is x changing if it's vertical?
No, y is changing.
So that's the x dot equals 0 null line.
Got it. Okay.
And null lines are a little bit. It's easy to get confused with null lines because sort of the y null line is sort of does the opposite of what you might naively expect it to do. Okay.
Well, so what?
So go ahead.
Well, no, I'm just confused about these two lines.
Right.
So
Me as well.
where
So
is this
is
even
the
coming?
y null
Where's
line
this
the
coming
one
from?
that y doesn't change, and
Right.
the x null line, right?
Right.
And
Yes.
the x null line is the one that the x doesn't change, but the y.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at
Okay.
the antimony together. Let's look
It's
at
just
the
analytically derived, I think, because the equations are simple.
right. That's what I was going to say.
Oh, yeah.
Let's look at J1. J1 says dx by dt is equal to k1 over blah blah. Right. Let me go back to my annotator. Right here, this is equal to dx by dt. So what did he do? He said, yes, he said x prime equal to 0. X prime is equal to this stuff here. And then he solved y in terms of x. So it's an analytic solution. There you go.
Okay, that makes sense. And what is NP dot linspace just zeros?
No,
Or-
it's equally
no.
spaced. It's equivalent to writing a range.
Okay.
It's a
Okay, that
slightly
makes
better
sense.
behaved version of a range. There you go. Great. Wait a sec. Let's see. Yeah, that's fine. So why don't you solve for this one? Actually, the easiest one is to solve x in terms of y. So if I scan y, what is x? Solve this equation. Write this in the form of x equals something of y, the first one. There you go. Is this what he's plotting? Isn't that what he's plotting?
Yeah.
So the problem is that if the equations were complicated, you couldn't do that. You couldn't solve it analytically.
There is an easy way to do it. I mean, the way we were doing it, We have a vector of x, we have a vector of y. We just make the differences between both, and we have an arrow.
Right, but finding the nullclines means solving the roots of this equation. And in general, that's not analytically easy to do.
Oh yeah.
And it's not numerically easy to do either. That's the problem.
Yeah, I started to think.
So actually finding the nullclines is not trivial. If you ask ChatGPT, it says to try to do it analytically first. ChatGPT recommends using Mathematica to do it, solve it analytically. Or use a fancy root finder, Mathematica root finder. So it's not trivial to find the nullclines. You can do it. In other words, if you scan in Y, and then you scan in X, and you ask, if you have some threshold, I'll say that I'm on the nullcline if the value of the derivative is less than some threshold. You get approximate nullclines that way, but it tends to be pretty messy. It's not very pretty. And if you can't do the nullclines analytically, it's a bit awkward. Okay, any other questions about this? Because this is
So maybe just from a term, when you say root finder, do you talk about the root, square root, and such roots, or do you talk about another root? Because
okay,
I'm a bit lost with
so
square root.
this is English issue.
Yes.
So the
But
root of an equation are the values of the variables where the function is 0.
Oh, so just the derivative.
So if I have a function, yes. So if I have a function f of x comma y, the root of f of x comma y is all the values of x and y pairs where f is 0.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
So yes, the word root is used in a lot of different ways. Great.
Should we go over this one or no?
We can look at it. Can somebody erase the annotations so that we can?
Yeah. Where's my erase? Okay. Okay, this one I changed the colors to figure out what was going on. Great. It was all red, but wait.
That's pretty.
I mean, this one's simpler. So I guess I can explain it. Or should I explain it? Well, okay, so this is just a like it's like something's always going to S1, S1's going to S2, S2 is going to something that's constant. And let's see. Essentially they plot it in blocks, like yeah, S1 starts. So this is with S2. They just plot this in 4 different blocks. When S1 is 0, when S2 is 0, when S1 is 2, when S1 is 2, and when S2 is 2. And they iterate over 0.2 each time.
Right. So in our case, we started with a grid of initial position points, like in the second example. Right. We started with capital A 0 equal to 0.1, capital B 0 equal to 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. So we started with a grid. What he's doing here is he's walking around the edge of the domain and stepping along that. So he's starting at 0, 0.25, 0.5, 0.2. S2 equals 0, S1 equals step. S2 equals 0, S1 equals step. So he's not drawing all the square. He's not going through the interior of the square. He's only going around the edge. That's why he's got 4 of
them. Yeah. I mean, I think that's about it. And it shows that there is only one point, or where everything converges.
A single
Um,
stable fixed point, yes.
Yeah, which you can't really tell what it is, but like 1.5, 0.75, I don't know.
That's about right. Great. And that was
Yeah.
fun. People were able to walk through this. As I say, the most complicated thing is that stream plot function, and it's worth going on looking in the manual for how that works, because it's a very powerful function, but it's pretty complicated. Some of these plotting routines are very elaborate. Okay. All right. Any other questions about this? Do people want to take a 5-minute break and then maybe, Hayden, did you have more you wanted to go over? Or shall we talk about stability for a little bit?
The only other thing I had was that we're going to take that framework code and adapt it to the toggle example we were just doing. But I think that given that we built the phase plot already, it's probably best just to move on to stability. We can.
I would ask people to try to do that yourself.
Yeah.
In other words, use the code that you just showed that use the stream plot. Replace the little Antimony definition of the simulation for the oscillator with the one that we did in class, and then you'll have to adjust the line spacing, the X and Y ranges. You'll have to change the null lines.
Yeah, it turns out you don't need to alter too much though, so it's actually a pretty powerful way of plotting a number of different functions as opposed to having to rewrite, your loops each time depending on what you want to plot. So Ibrahim, question?
Yeah. So I mean, in their plot, I mean, basically they just did it all by hand, especially like the stable points. Is there like a way other, because they just wrote like 0,6, plot that as green, 6,0 plotted as green.
And one is
Is there a way
missing.
we can do that?
One of the fixed points is missing. One of the
Yeah.
fixed points has the wrong color and one is missing. So it shows you doing it by hand is the easy way to make a mistake.
Okay. Is there a way to just get the value from that? Is it just like find the point where they both, where X prime and Y prime are both 0?
Well, so yeah, any place X prime and Y prime are both 0 is a fixed point.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about is how you know whether it's a stable or an unstable fixed point.
Mhm.
And that's what I want to start doing in the rest of the lecture.
Okay.
Doing this numerically is a little bit tricky. And if somebody throws up again the plot that you showed, William, with the null lines on it, if somebody puts that up on the screen. Not this one, that one, good. So the reason it's numerically tricky is that suppose I'm looking for the places where dx dt is near 0. And suppose I try to do this not analytically, but I try to do it numerically. And I'm looking around here. Well, you'll notice that there's a long region here where the thing is almost vertical. Right? There's a pretty long region where it's nearly vertical. And so if I set a numerical threshold that says any point where the value of the dx by dt value is smaller than some threshold, that's a null line, I'm going to get a lot of points. I'm not just going to get that one point there. And so if I really want to find it, I have to do some rather elaborate root finding. There are numerical root finders that will do that for you, but they're quite slow and they're pretty complicated. And so that's the reason this is tricky. If you can't do these null clines analytically, getting them numerically is not trivial. You know, someplace like here, like this one, where there's only a very small range over which the derivative is small, that's easy to find. But these places where the derivative is almost zero for a long space, it makes it quite difficult to find the null cline. So that's why the numerical solution is tricky. You can do it, but it's not. It's as I said a couple of weeks ago, I thought, oh, I'll just write a quick code to do that, to find them. And it's not so easy to do. And so I said, okay, I'll try ChatGPT. ChatGPT says solve them analytic. And then I told ChatGPT, no, I want a numerical solution. It gave me it was quite elaborate. It's not a trivial.
AI telling you to solve something analytically sounds like the first step towards its superiority complex. We'll just do it analytically.
Well, it says load SymPy, which is the sort of the Mathematica, simplified Mathematica clone for Python, for symbolic manipulation. But the problem is that even if you do symbolic manipulation, there still are equations which don't have an analytic solution. And so then you're sort of stuck. XPP-Aught, the famous program of Bart Ehrmantraut, has really good numerical null cline solvers. But and it used to be a long time ago that actually there was a version of XPP-Aught that would run inside of Tellurium, but it doesn't work anymore. It wasn't maintained. Okay. So did people want to take a short break? We're not going to have a lot of time to talk about stability. We've already been playing with numerically and thinking about fixed points and stability a bit. So for the next half hour or so, I'd like to start talking about some of the mathematics of stability. And most of this is done in an appendix in Herbert's textbook. And in any mathematical biology textbook will do it, or in any dynamical systems textbook. Typically, you do stability analysis for one dimension first, and then 2 dimensions. And then you essentially say, well, it generalizes to higher order, but don't go into the details. And the main reason for that is it's rather hard to draw things in 3D. You can draw 1D, you can draw 2D, but 3D is hard to draw. And things really don't change that much when you go to higher dimensions, although the things get a little bit more involved in terms of computation. So let's start out by defining some set of concentrations. And we're going to be using vector notation here because otherwise things become very cumbersome. We've been giving species separate names, A, B, C, D. Now we're going to think about a vector which has the first element is the concentration of one species, the second element is concentration of the second species, the third element is concentration of the third species, and so on. And so we'll say a set of concentrations, X star vector, is a steady state if, when we plug that in, all of the time derivatives for each of the species independently vanish. And again, we've had this idea before. The difference is here we're writing it with a vector notation that may or may not be as familiar to people. And we're going to explicitly say that this fixed point will depend on some parameter in the system. The decay rate of a chemical species, the velocity Vmax, the Hill exponent, the Hill coefficient. And we'll say that X star is a stable fixed point if when we move a little bit away from x star, the flow takes us back where we came from. And it's an unstable fixed point if moving a little bit away, we fall apart, we move away. And we can think about this as, say, a pencil that's a pen that's balanced. If I balance this very accurately up, it's an unstable fixed point. If I push it a little bit to the left, it'll fall down. If I push it a little bit to the right, it falls down. If it's lying flat on the table, it's a stable fixed point. If I push it up a little bit, it comes back where it was. And so that's fundamentally the concept of a stable and unstable fixed point. Okay. Any questions about the notation? No? Okay. So let's start out with the simplest possible
So
example.
I have your alpha is a vector of all the parameters then.
Sorry?
So your lambda is a vector of all the parameters that we have.
Yes, in principle, lambda is a vector of all the parameters. That's right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Although in this case, we're going to simplify things a lot. Yes. So let's just now start out with something much simpler, which is suppose we only have one chemical species. Now, in general, for biology, that's not very interesting, but the mathematics, we want to do the simplest case first. So we'll say dx by dt is equal to some function of x. We can always write it that way. And we're going to assume to begin with that there's only one parameter. There could be more. And x star is a fixed point if f of x star is 0. That's the definition of the fixed point. And again, x star is stable fixed point if starting near x star, we come back to x star. It's unstable if we move further away. Now we want to know mathematically when is the fixed point stable and when is it unstable. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out by saying we're going to have initial position x0, which is x star, plus some small perturbation. Mathematicians love to call perturbations epsilon, so that's what we'll do. And so we're now going to say that x of t, time evolution of x, is the initial value, x star of lambda, which is just a constant, plus epsilon, and now the distance from our initial position is going to evolve in time. Okay? And so our fixed point is stable if epsilon of t goes to 0, and it's unstable if epsilon of t gets bigger. And so now we're going to evaluate what epsilon of t is. And
But sorry, a question, is this not depending how high epsilon is? I mean, if you make it very high, it will always become unstable.
No, but this is always linear stability analysis. So we're only considering situations where epsilon is small. And what small means is actually rather tricky, and we can come back to that later. This is all local stability analysis, it's not global stability analysis. Good question. So we're now going to say dx by dt is equal to f of lambda of x, and we plug in x is equal to x star plus epsilon. So we have d by dt of x star plus epsilon is equal to f of x star plus epsilon. And I apologize, but I'm not going to put in all the subscripts and things when I say it in words because it's just too long. Now we know dx by dt of x star is 0 because x star is a constant. Okay. Here we're just simplifying, we're separating. So d by dt of x star is 0. And so I'm left with d by dt of epsilon is equal to f of x star plus epsilon. Okay, everybody got that? This is relatively simple algebra at this point. So the next thing that we want to do is epsilon is small, as Elmer just said. And so what we're going to do is a Taylor expansion of F around X star. Well, what is the Taylor expansion of F of X? That is F of X plus d by dx of F of X evaluated at X star plus 1/2 of d squared by dx squared of F of X evaluated at X star times epsilon squared plus ... I left out the epsilon here. Has everybody done a Taylor expansion at some point? That's something typically people do in first-year calculus. Has anyone not seen a Taylor expansion before? I'm not getting a lot of feedback one way or the other. If you haven't seen it before, Wikipedia has a good article on it. But this is the standard way that you do expansion around a value. If you know the value of the function at 9, and you want to get the value of the function at 9.1, you evaluate it at 9, and then you do a perturbation of the value by that difference of 0.1. Now, by definition, f of x star is 0. So this first term is 0. And we're left with d by dt of epsilon is equal to the derivative of f with respect to x evaluated at x star times epsilon plus 1/2 square second derivative and so on. Okay. And again, if epsilon of t goes to 0, it's stable. If epsilon of t gets bigger, it's unstable. If epsilon is small, then the second term with epsilon squared is much smaller than the first term with epsilon. And so we can neglect it, and we can say that d by dt of epsilon is approximately d by dx of f evaluated at x star times epsilon. And that's what we've done here. D by dt of epsilon is approximately d by dx of f evaluated at x star times epsilon. Why are we doing all of this? Well, d by dt of epsilon equals constant times epsilon is what kind of equation? What does that give us? D by dt of x equals alpha times x is what? What is x of t? That's an exponential. So we've been able to reduce our complicated initial function into a simple exponential. So d by dt of epsilon is approximately d by dx of f evaluated at x star times epsilon. But this term here, d by dx of f of x star at x star, is just a constant. And that means epsilon of t is the initial value of epsilon times e to the t d by dx f of x evaluated at x star. So if this derivative is positive, the distance between our fixed point and the position of our value grows, and we're unstable. If it's negative, we come back and it's stable. So the deviation grows exponentially if that derivative is positive, and it decreases exponentially if that derivative is negative. And so now we have a very simple result. If we know f, we take the derivative of f with respect to its argument, we plug in the value of our fixed point, and if that gives us a positive number, our fixed point is unstable. If it gives us a negative number, our fixed point is stable. If it's 0, it's what's called neutrally stable. We don't know whether the fixed point is stable or not. We have to do fancier things. This is called linear stability analysis because we're only looking at the first order expansion of this function, which is the linear expansion. We're looking at the values that are linear in epsilon. Okay. Have people seen this derivation before? If you do physics, you do this a lot.
So I have some questions. I mean, this is what you do generally when you do tail expansion, and you always get an exponential function when you only look at the first derivate, right?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, so this is what you now showed here is just the principle of the Taylor expansion.
Well, no, the Taylor expansion is simply saying that the term is linear in epsilon. The exponential comes about because we're saying the time derivative of epsilon is equal to the Taylor expansion. People seem a little bit confused here. So
I see that you are around the point that you search that you can look the linearity that I see from the Taylor expansion, but now that it becomes exponential, that's what I'm.
So let me see if I can. Where's my pen? My pen.
Sorry.
I just had my. Sorry about this. I have to find my drawing tablet pen, which I just had out. Where did I put it?
Maybe other people understand this one. Definitely.
Okay. Let me draw this. Let me draw this a little bit. So suppose that I have a fixed point. Let's suppose I have my value. Here's my value x star. And now I I'll change the color. Can people see the annotation on the screen?
Okay. Yeah.
And now I have a new point here, which is x star plus epsilon.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to know if I evolve in time, do I go back to my initial value or do I go further away? And I know that I'm going to not write all the lambdas and everything else. I know that dx by dt is equal to f of x. That's the equation. Okay, so now I'm going to start out with x equal to x star plus epsilon. So I write dx star plus epsilon dt equals f of x star plus epsilon, right? Is that okay? Actually, I've been trying on the slides to put everything in again and again, but maybe it's too much. So let's just do it by hand.
Yeah, I understand.
Now, dx star by dt is 0 because x star is a constant. So I get d epsilon by dt is equal to f of x star plus epsilon. Now I
X star
expand
is-
because epsilon is small.
Yeah.
I now expand F. And so now I remember the Taylor expansion that says d epsilon by dt is equal to F of X star. That's the first order, 0th order term, plus df by dx
Half.
at X star times epsilon, plus stuff which is of order epsilon squared and higher. That's the approximation. That's the Taylor approximation. Okay. And I'm going to neglect the higher order term. This is 0 because I've said that that's the definition of a fixed point. So I'm left then with d epsilon by dt is equal to df
Yeah.
by dx, evaluated X star, times epsilon. If I call this A, this is d epsilon by dt equals A times epsilon. This is just an exponential. So this means epsilon of t equals epsilon 0 e to the t a. That's the derivation.
Okay, yeah, because it was the differential and you had to do the integral. Yes.
I realized that all the subscripts and superscripts makes this look more complicated.
Mm.
And the
I
reason
have as well to the notation, mathematical notation. What is the bar to the x? What is this? F lambda x, and then you have the bar that you have, and there you have now the fixed point, but before you had the in the how should I explain?
I'm not
So
sure.
What exactly, what is the wording for the bar, for the vertical bar
You mean
that
what
you
is
have
what
in
is
your,
on here?
yes,
So
yes,
when you have it, when you take a derivative,
yes.
derivative is a function.
I
You have
think
to say what
we write these things
what
somehow
value-
differently.
what value of x is plugged in? What value of x is, where do you take the derivative?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, this is the standard notation.
So this tells you which x you put into your function.
That's right, yes.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Again, if people haven't had a course in calculus, then this notation will not be so familiar. But
I mean,
this
we have differential and integral, and I think here in the US, the calculus is heavy loaded and it's very, very intense compared to the differential and integral that we kind of had, or I don't know, but I understand now when you explain it. I think I understand it enough.
Thank you for asking. I mean, I'm sort of stuck in the sense that there is a standard mathematical notation for these things. Unlike the good news is that unlike the arrow diagrams that we've worked with, there pretty much are not a lot of different notations. There are a couple of different places where there are abbreviations and things, but it's pretty consistent. So yes, using this bar to mean evaluated at this value is standard. This is one of the reasons I'm always a little reluctant to go through these slides, is depending on people's mathematical background, this may be difficult, more familiar.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the way to learn it.
Concepts-
That's the way to learn it. And when I now look at this equation, I mean, these are all partial integrals because you have, right? And we had
Right. We
that's
start
a
out with an ordinary differential equation,
differential equation
d
and
by
different.
dt by d by dt, but it becomes a partial derivative because we're evaluating f with respect to x. So we have a derivative with respect to time here and a derivative with respect to add the value of the argument here.
And then this is the point where you have the bar and say which is the x that you put into your partial differential equation. Yeah, and I'm vaguely familiar with the partial differential equation, but I'm familiar with differential and integral. So I think that's why I'm not so familiar with the notation then.
Well,
yeah.
in this case, the partial derivative doesn't do anything different. If you wrote this as just a regular d, it wouldn't change anything.
And you would write this part too? The last one?
You still have to write.
Then it's just me who
still have to
know
evaluate
it. I'm sorry.
Somewhere. You still have to evaluate the function somewhere.
Yeah.
And so you have to
I'm
know.
learning.
I could also, if you wanted to, there's another notation for this that's actually some people use, but is not actually a very good one because it's ambiguous. But you could also write, if you wanted to, something like this: d by dx f of x equals x star, for example. But you have to tell somewhere what the value of x is that you're evaluating at.
Yeah.
So if you don't
I can't remember, it's just maybe too long ago, but I understand now. When I see it, I understand more again, and that's good. That's
And I'm sure, Elmer, if you're rusty on this, I'm sure other people are too. So I'm happy to take the time.
I think I'm a bit older and rustier than most, but it's okay.
And Pedro makes the point that small specifically means that epsilon squared can be neglected with respect to epsilon. So that's what small means.
Thank you. I think, just to mention as well, I think you should not skip these slides. I think you learn a language when you're confronted with it, and this is reading an alphabet, reading a text is very difficult, but when you're all the time confronted, you will learn to read newspapers and papers and whatever, and in the math it should be the same. I think you should show it, and over time it sinks in. And that's what I would like to say.
Yeah, I mean, if people came from a physics background or mathematics background, this would be very natural. If you come from a computer science background or experimental biology background, these may not be familiar term notation.
But then I should learn it, and then I should get exposed to it, and that's what I hope for, right, when I go to class. I mean, of course, it looks maybe really stupid because I don't know, I don't see this, I don't know notation, but it will sink in over time, and when I can connect it, then it becomes familiar, right? That's yeah. I'm happy for that you explained it. Thank you very much.
Yep. Okay. So let's actually now draw some pictures for what this looks like. So, and again, the way I notated these slides, if I did them again now, these are old slides, I might make them a little simpler. I keep repeating things so that all the definitions are on every slide, but that makes them a little bit busy. So let's imagine I now have a plot. Here's f of x versus x. And I've said that by definition, f of x is 0 at x star. So it's 0 at x star. And here is a case where df dx is negative. So it's a decreasing function. That's a stable fixed point. Here, df dx is an increasing function. So it's an unstable fixed point. Here, it's tangent. And that's called a marginally stable fixed point. And so even if the notation here looks strange, if you can simply plot f of x versus x, you can look wherever that crosses the x-axis, the 0 axis. If it's decreasing, you have a stable fixed point. If it's increasing, it's unstable. So you don't even have to know what the derivatives mean. You just have to look at the picture. Okay. Now, this is the key idea, and I know we're running out of time, but I want to get at least introduce the idea, and you can think about it. You can read about it. Wikipedia has a good article. That Essential Mathematical Biology has a good article. Herbert has a good article. The equation for the dynamics has a bifurcation at a critical value of lambda, call it lambda c, when the number or stability of the fixed points change. So for example, if I come back here, if I change lambda, the slope of that line might change. If the slope goes from being positive to being 0 to being negative, actually I just drew it backwards the way I drew it, my hand works, depending on what you're seeing on your screen, then the value of lambda at which it goes from positive to negative is the bifurcation in lambda. And we can see this here. Suppose that I have different values of lambda, and here is f of lambda. As lambda goes up, here is lambda 1. This doesn't cross the x-axis at all, so there's no fixed point. I increase lambda a little bit, there's still no fixed point. I increase lambda a little bit more, my function now touches the x-axis at a single point. At that point, the slope at the crossing is 0. And so I have a single marginally stable fixed point. If I now increase lambda even more, it goes down. Now my blue line crosses the x-axis twice. It has a place where it crosses going down on the left, which is a stable fixed point, and a place where it crosses going up on the right, which is an unstable fixed point. If I increase lambda more, the places where I cross move away from each other. William, you look unhappy about this. Try to think about, don't worry about the derivatives and everything else. Just look at the picture. Suppose I have a piece of string that's hanging down, and I move the string down, and I ask, does it cross some horizontal line? Doesn't cross, doesn't cross, doesn't cross. Just touches the line. Crosses the line. Crosses the line. And I'm asking what happens at the place where it crosses. Is it going down, flat, or up? Okay. So this is sort of interesting.
Can you see in this image now the attractor or not?
Attractors are a dynamical result. There is no attractor is a fixed point. A stable fixed point is an attractor. So I wouldn't use the attractor word yet. You haven't gotten there.
I have the problem that I have. It's hard to understand why the green point is a stable fixed point and the red point is an unstable, just because it goes upwards or downwards. I mean, I see the formula, but the feeling.
That was the derivation we just did.
Yes, I understand where it comes from, but I have no feeling for it at the moment. Maybe I just wait. Maybe
well, we probably won't have time today because we're out of time. I want one more slide, but if you work with it, you will see it very explicitly. It will become, if you play with it, you will immediately experience numerically why this works this way. The analytics may be less convoluted, but again, the picture should be, I hope, clear. The idea of no fixed point, marginally stable fixed point, pair of stable and unstable fixed points.
I mean, these are the solution from a function, right? that's how you find the solution from a function when you find the 0 points. Is this not?
But I don't actually have to, but you can do everything graphically. In other words, I know what f of x is. I have x on my x-axis. I draw the graph. Anytime f of x crosses 0, I have a fixed point. If it crosses 0 going down, I have a stable fixed point. If it crosses 0 going up, I have an unstable fixed point. Here's another example. Suppose that as lambda changes, instead of moving vertically, I have a curve that changes its shape a little bit. It becomes more kinked. Here, f of lambda 1 crosses going down, stable fixed point. It gets flattened out, sort of like a chair, neutrally stable fixed point. Now it becomes a cubic, down, up, down. I now have 3 fixed points, stable, unstable, stable. So I went from stable fixed point to neutrally stable fixed point to stable, unstable, stable fixed point, triple. Okay. So I can have situations where I start out with a stable fixed point. As I increase lambda, this fixed point becomes unstable. I can have a situation where I start out with an unstable fixed point. As I increase lambda, fixed point becomes stable. And that's actually all pretty much that you can do in one dimension. That's it. That's all there is for stability. And we could now come back, and what I'd like to do maybe next time, we'll be repeating this analysis for that auto activator that we did in class a couple of weeks ago. Because I'll just jump ahead to show you the picture. Here's the whole derivation, which we did a couple of weeks ago. But I know my function. My function is k Basel plus activating Hill function minus decay. I can plot the right-hand side, and I get something that looks like that. That is dA by dt. It has 3 fixed points. If I remember, decreasing 1, increasing 1, decreasing 1. Remember, I got 2 steady state values. If I started low, it stayed low. If I started high, it stayed high. In the middle, there was something which was in between. That was exactly what I got. And so next time, we'll come back to this. I'll review the idea of stable and unstable fixed points. And then we'll go back over this example and do the analysis of its stability, okay? So I would encourage you, Herbert has a section on stability, chapter 13. He does the derivation that I did here on the screen. If you look in that Essential Mathematical Biology by Britton, it's done out. That textbook that Connor recommended on dynamical systems does this out. There's a good Wikipedia article on it. But fundamentally, the nice thing is this graphical idea. The line's going down, it's stable. If the line's going up, it's unstable. Gives you a very simple way of understanding stability. Any questions before we break for tonight? Okay, well, I'm glad we got to go over this a little bit. I'll be around now, and we can next week we can keep going with this. And please do read a little bit on this. Please look at Herbert's chapter. And if you find that the mathematics of something like a Taylor expansion or stability are unfamiliar to you, then please do a little bit of background reading to fill in. Okay. I want to thank everybody for being flexible and for working together and showing your results today. And I think we made some progress on the coding. And I hope that working together, we can build an understanding of some of these basic concepts. Good night, everybody.